Welcome to this episode of the Leading in Dentistry podcast. I'm Dr. Wes Eggett. After spending the last 20 years in a variety of leadership positions, and as a student of leadership myself, I started Leading in Dentistry to share what I found and to continue learning with you. If anything from this episode stands out, check out the show notes, our online courses, or one-on-one coaching on leadingindentistry.com. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Leading in Dentistry podcast. I'm Dr. Wes Eggett. For those of you new to the podcast, I'm a practicing associate dentist just outside of Denver, Colorado, and I started Leading in Dentistry to help develop the leadership skills of each team member in the dental office, not just the business owner. And I started this podcast specifically while I'm not an owner of any dental practice, as I really want to get across the message that you don't need to wait until you're in charge to be a leader. So this morning on my way into work, I was listening to a podcast interview between Andy Stanley and Adam Grant. Now, Andy Stanley is a pastor, and he has a lot of really good leadership resources through his podcast, through his website. But he was interviewing Adam Grant, who's this psychologist that teaches at Wharton about social psychology, and he has a lot of really good resources as well that you might be familiar with. He has a book called Think Again, about getting you to question some of your assumptions, how to think slowly and work through problems. And then he has this new book called Unlocking Hidden Potential. And so the discussion they were having was on how to unlock your own hidden potential and how to help others unlock their hidden potential as well. And it reminded me of one of my favorite quotes that I heard when I was in college. And it's a little complex, so we'll break it down, but this is what it says. If you treat people as they are, they will become worse. If you treat them as they could be, they will become better. If we treat people as if they were what they ought to be, we help them become what they are capable of becoming. So the idea is that if you treat people as they are, not only will they not improve, but they'll actually become worse because they become stagnant. But if you treat them as they could be, then they become better. And then the end of the quote there, if you treat them as if they were what they ought to be, then you help them become what they're capable of becoming. So you can help unlock hidden potential in other people by seeing the best in them and finding what that hidden potential is and giving them opportunities to flourish. Treat them as if they are already the thing that you want them to become, and then they can continue to grow. And I thought this was really interesting. And as they dive into this topic and talk about unlocking hidden potential in yourself and in others, they really get down deep in the idea of failure, because failure is so important to unlocking that potential. If you do not allow yourself opportunities to fail, you never allow yourself to see what the boundaries are. You never can see what you ought to be and see what you are capable of becoming. It reminded me of another story I heard this last week that was about, it made this analogy about video games and trying to overcome challenges in video games. And what happens so often is people will stay in their comfort zone. And the way it was described was, imagine that you're, playing a video game and you're at level 3 and you come across this big boss and you try to beat the boss and you fail. So instead of going back to that level and trying to beat that boss, what you do is you go back to level 2 and just keep beating the boss there. And you just continue working on level 2 because you know that you're good at that. And that sounds ridiculous for anyone familiar with video games. The idea is to progress. It's to get to the end. It's to beat the game. It's not just to sit there and go through a level that you played over and over and over again just because you're good at it and you feel comfortable with it. But what happens in leadership, so often we do that exact thing. We get to the big boss, the bigger challenge, and instead of tackling it and overcoming it, we go back to a challenge that we feel more comfortable with. And then we talked about this in a previous episode with the idea of the bike rack. Now, this story comes from, it's a fable, a legend of a group of people that were working on building a nuclear power plant. And they got so hung up in the intricacies and the regulations of having to build the nuclear power plant part of the power plant that they said, let's direct our energy somewhere else that we're a little more comfortable with. And they started talking about how to build the bike rack out front. And they really got down into how many bike racks are there going to be? What color are they going to be? What direction will it be facing? And they lost track of what they really needed to be working on, which was how to solve the problem of constructing this nuclear power plant, a much bigger, more important problem that directed them towards their goal. But instead, they spent all that time focused on something that they felt was a more manageable task. And again, another example where it sounds ridiculous, but we do this so often in leadership, and we need to start holding ourselves accountable to be able to tackle the problems that we really need to tackle. But in order to do that, we have to get comfortable with the idea of failing. We have to get comfortable with being outside of our comfort zone. So what I wanted to do today was go through the Teach Leadership Model. And for those of you new to the podcast, the Teach Leadership Model is the 5-point system that I've developed to break down leadership into more sizable chunks. You tell someone, go focus on leadership, go build leadership skills, is too vague. But if you can break it down into specific skills that people need to develop, specific areas to develop different skills, then you can automatically become a better leader by focusing on those things. So for me, the 5 points that I've broken leadership down into spell the word teach. It's trust, expectations, accountability, consistency, and heart. And I just want to show, if you are uncomfortable with being uncomfortable and then you never get into those uncomfortable situations, you are not going to develop. And I'll show you what those roadblocks are as we go through the Teach Leadership Model. So first, trust. Getting comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable is essential to developing trust. Now, when I talk about trust, I talk about the 3 key relationships that you need to develop trust with. The first is relationship with the organization. And you do that by putting yourself out there, accepting the job, and going to a new spot where you don't know if they do what they say they're going to do, but you have to develop that trust for them. And if you are not willing to be uncomfortable and to try something new, you're never going to step into that role or that position or that job where you're going to see that stretched and see that validated. And the second is with your peers. Now, if you don't feel comfortable putting yourself out there, starting conversations, then you're never going to develop the relationships that will develop the trust with your peers. You will be the lone wolf at work that doesn't talk to anybody and just puts their head down and does their job, which over time, I mean, that's that first part of that quote we were talking about earlier. You treat people as they are, they'll become worse. If you stay where you are, you will not just stay where you are. You will actually regress and get worse. And then the third relationship you need to develop trust with is trust with yourself. And developing trust with yourself takes so much discomfort because you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, these are my weaknesses. This is what I need to focus on. These are my opportunities for improvement. And if you are uncomfortable doing that, you will never get to the inner layer of the onion that is you, the parts of you that need to work. And so I just encourage you to, as you're thinking about trust, make sure that you're able to develop this skill of being uncomfortable, to be able to look at yourself, your other relationships with your team members, and your relationship with your organization. Be willing to put yourself out there in order to develop that trust. The second item on the Teach Leadership Model is expectations. Now, expectations also require some candid looks in the mirror. There are 2 parts to this expectations section of the Teach Leadership Model, and they are, first, knowing what your expectations are, learning how to identify what expectations you actually have, and the second is being able to communicate those expectations in a way that builds a vision and creates an ideal that other people can work towards. And so if you are uncomfortable, again, looking at yourself in the mirror or looking at the things that you do and analyzing how you actually act and what your actual expectations are, you'll never get clarity on what it is that you expect. And the people that you work with will never get clarity on your expectations and what done looks like, what success looks like, because you are not able to clearly articulate those things. So the first part is addressing that discomfort of being able to find out what your expectations are. And the second is finding out how to articulate those to other people. And you have to have discomfort in that because it involves communicating with a team. It involves putting yourself out there, and not just yourself, but the desires that you have. You have these expectations and have to be able to communicate those in a way that you feel will be well received. So that again goes back to developing trust with other people. And all of this involves being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Now, the next item on the Teach Leadership Model is accountability. And this is the one that is the most uncomfortable for people right out the gate. This is the one that you can easily identify what are the things that work that make you uncomfortable. Accountability is going to be where those answers come up the most. One of the best quotes I've ever heard is from Tim Ferriss, and he says, "Your success in life is largely determined by the number of uncomfortable conversations you are willing to have." And I'll say that again. Your success in life is largely determined by the number of uncomfortable conversations you are willing to have. And that all comes together in accountability. You have these expectations, you put yourself out there, but when people fail you, how do you hold them accountable? And how do you get comfortable doing that? And that just comes with developing those people skills from doing it over and over again, having reps of saying, you know what, this is what I want. This is the expectation that I have. This is the goal that I've set for myself, and I'm not going to reach that goal unless I have this uncomfortable conversation. One of the things I've also seen in the past is holding other people back by not holding them accountable. I'll say that again. You can hold other people back by not holding them accountable. Other people need to be able to grow as well, the people that you lead on your team. And if you are not holding them accountable, you are treating them, going back to that quote from the beginning, you are treating them as they are. You are not treating them treating them as they ought to be. And when you do that, you hold them back from the growth that they could experience. And if you can frame it in this light, looking at accountability as this is my opportunity to help someone else become the better version of themselves, and also looking at it with that quote from Tim Ferriss, my success is going to be determined by my ability to have this uncomfortable conversation. If you can pair those two ideas and help them frame your view of accountability, then you can get that courage, then you can get that confidence to go in there and be uncomfortable having that difficult conversation, and you develop those skills over time. And over time, those weaknesses will become strengths. Just a quick interruption here. If you are gaining some value from this podcast, if you enjoy it in any way, if you think someone else could benefit from it, then go ahead and share this with a friend, share it with your team, share it with a colleague. It really helps support the show. Now let's get back to it. Now, the next item on the list is consistency. So we've talked about trust and expectations and accountability. So developing trust with the people you work with, having clear expectations that you articulate to them, and then being able to hold them accountable. But you can't just do those things one time. The C in the Teach Leadership model is consistency. So being able to show up and do those things over and over and over again. Because to do it once, to develop that grit, to develop that strength, to have those uncomfortable conversations and to start a new program, that's one thing. But consistency is being able to do it repeatedly. And consistency, you'll come across discomfort there in developing systems and developing the tenacity to continue when it gets hard. Because it's pretty straightforward to go ahead and try something new, to start a new program, but to stick with it over time, to have that consistency, that is a whole different level of discomfort. And we used the word earlier, but grit is what this comes back to. So if you look at the studies by Angela Duckworth and you go look up anything about grit, you'll find her name. It's this idea that young kids who showed grit early on in life, they were able to have greater levels of success later in life, because grit is what's able to get you out of the valleys of the failures of trying to overcome difficulties through anything that you're trying to accomplish. And so being able to develop that strength to overcome even after you've gone through a failure, I mean, that is what will make or break your success in the long run, because you try implementing a new program, a new idea. When you hit that first failure, how you act then is going to set the tone for everything that comes after. So being able to have a failure, but still be consistent, that is when you'll see the most success. And the last part of the Teach Leadership model is the H, and it stands for heart. Now, the idea behind heart is that this is when you show up to work with passion, and the things that you do in a way that is inspirational to others and helps them gain a passion for what you're trying to accomplish as well. Discomfort shows up here because having heart requires you to be vulnerable and share something that's important to you. There's this quote from Brené Brown about vulnerability that says, "Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage." That part there about having courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. And as a leader, that is a difficult thing to grasp, the idea that you might not have control over an outcome, because you don't want to be seen as a failure. And so often we are tempted to have an idea and let it marinate and let it incubate until we are ready to reveal it to the world in its perfect form. And when we do that, we are vulnerable about something. And even those times when we think we have a perfect idea, it can be met with resistance. But because we put so much time and effort and energy into it, and our ego is built built up in this new program or this new initiative and we are ready to share it with our team and they should be buying in because it's now perfect, I mean, that's when you start to get your ego in the way of your leadership. And you never want to do that because it undermines yourself. It undermines your own mission. You go in with good intentions and you put so much time and effort and energy into something, but then when someone gives you some pushback because they know what it's really going to look like on the other side, that's when you should have, gone back to the drawing board and had them give you the buy-in from the beginning. So if you have something that you're passionate about and a project that you want to share with your team, getting them to buy in as early as possible, getting them to see your process of you coming up with the idea and working on the idea. They give you little ideas that will make it better over time, and that gives you the buy-in that you need in order to make something successful. But so often with leaders, we have this ego, and the ego gets in the way of us having heart. It gets in the way of us leading with passion because we're not allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. The way to get over that is to get comfortable with being vulnerable with the team, being open about, I don't know everything. Now, in this interview that I referenced in the beginning between Andy Stanley and Adam Grant, there was this quote that Adam Grant said that really stood out about this particular topic. He said, as a leader, it's not about making all the decisions. It's about making sure the decisions are right. So one more time, he said, it's not about making all the decisions. It's about making sure the decisions are right. And if you put so much pressure on yourself to make the decisions by yourself and be the one who is the shot caller, then you don't allow other people to contribute in a way that's meaningful. And you end up making a lot of decisions, but sometimes they can be the wrong decision because you're not operating with all the information with the people who really know what's going on, the people that are the members of your team, and the people that will be affected by the decisions that you make. And the earlier in that process you can involve people, the earlier you can show them your vision and show them the passion that you have for this project, the earlier you can get buy-in that will help make your vision actually come to pass. And it'll become a better version of what it actually is. So in summary, today's message with the Teach Leadership model is that each of these areas are areas where you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And you do that by having the reps and framing this in a way that you understand this is going to lead to your growth. And if that is what you're going after, if progress is what you are trying to achieve, then the only way you can do that is to be uncomfortable. There's a quote that says, there's no growing in the comfort zone and no comfort in the growing zone. And if you can develop the skill of being able to sit in the discomfort, you're going to end up becoming a much better leader. You will develop more trust. You'll know what your expectations are. You'll be able to hold other people accountable. You'll be able to do those things consistently, and you'll do them in a way that has passion and heart. And with that, always be leading and always be learning. We'll see you next time. And that's it for this episode of the Leading in Dentistry podcast. If you learned something today, please leave a 5-star review and share the episode with a friend. If you're ready to take the next step for yourself or provide leadership training for a team member, visit leadingindentistry.com to check out our online courses and one-on-one coaching.